please. I can explain. I didn't want you to find out like this.
Rain made the city look like it was apologizing for itself. Malcolm Reed stood under the sharp edge of a glass awning, shoulders hunched, one hand clenched around a paper cup that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The cup was still warm where his fingers pressed into it. Warm enough to feel like life, not enough to feel like comfort. On the sidewalk in front of him, a thin white envelope lay open like a wound. He stared at what it had spilled, a glossy card, heavy stock, black letters so clean they looked cruel. Claire Harrington, Chief Executive Officer, Harrington Commerce. His throat tightened in a way that didn't feel like sadness. It felt like his body trying to swallow his pride before it choked him. He had known her as Nora. Nora, with her gray hoodie and thrift store sneakers. Nora who laughed like she didn't have a reason to. Nora who sat in a coffee shop and asked him, "How do you make cocoa taste like home?" A memory rose, sharp and bright, her fingers wrapped around a mug, the pinky slightly lifted without thinking, like someone who'd been taught manners before they'd been taught freedom. He dismissed it as a quirk. Now he understood it as the edge of a world he'd never been invited into. Across the street, the lobby doors of the tower slid open. Light spilled out onto wet concrete. A small crowd moved like a school of expensive fish. Men in dark coats, women with hair that didn't frizz in the rain. An event had just ended upstairs. Music still pulsed faintly through the building's bones. Then he saw her. Claire Harrington stepped out as if the rain had been scheduled and approved. No hoodie, no worn sneakers, a tailored coat, a sleek umbrella opened by a man who looked like he'd been trained to anticipate her needs. Her hair pinned back, earrings that caught the city lights like tiny blades. And yet, despite all that polish, her face looked undone. Her gaze swept across the sidewalk, searching. When her eyes found Malcolm, her breath hitched. Her mouth opened as if to call his name, as if she could say Malcolm and make the last few weeks real again. But Malcolm didn't move. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just held the business card between two fingers, like it was contaminated. His voice came out low, almost drowned by the rain. "So this is what it was," he said. Claire's eyes shone. "Malcolm." He cut her off, not with anger, but with something colder. Something that sounded like a door locking. "Don't." She took a step forward anyway, the umbrella man hesitating behind her. "Please, let me explain." Malcolm let out a laugh that wasn't humor. It was disbelief. It was pain trying to stay dignified. "You explained plenty," he said, lifting the card. "Just not to me." For a second, Claire's shoulders sagged, just a fraction, like the weight of her own name had finally become too heavy to carry. The rain kept falling. Seattle didn't stop for heartbreak. And Malcolm, who had spent years teaching himself to survive without asking anyone for anything, finally turned away from the brightest building in the city. He walked into the dark, into the wet, into the part of town where nobody asked what your last name meant. Because the truth was simple. He could handle being broke. He could handle being tired. He could even handle being alone. What he couldn't handle was being someone else's test. And to understand why that single card could break a man who had endured so much, you have to go back. Back to when it was just a father, a daughter, a cup of cocoa, and a girl in a gray hoodie who didn't look like she belonged anywhere at all. Seattle wore gray the way some people wore perfume. Constant, familiar, impossible to ignore. Malcolm Reed had learned to move through that gray like it was a second skin. At 33, he carried exhaustion the way other men carried cologne. Subtle, persistent, clinging to him even when he tried to wash it away. His job kept him on a schedule that never matched the rest of the world. Nights, supervising a fleet of delivery vans for a regional logistics company. Mornings, catching half sleep. Afternoons, being fully awake for the one person who mattered. Ava Reed. 7 years old. Big eyes, loud laugh. A sense of justice that made her dangerous in the best way. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, chipped paint near the window, heating that worked only when it felt like it, but Malcolm kept it clean. Not because it impressed anyone, but because order was the only thing he could control. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, Rain tapped on the windows like it wanted to come in and sit down. Ava sat at the kitchen table with a box of crayons, tongue peeking out slightly as she drew. Malcolm rinsed dishes, the radio low in the background. He liked the old soul stations, songs that sounded like they knew something about surviving. Ava didn't look up when she asked, "Daddy, why don't we have a big house?" Malcolm didn't flinch. He dried his hands slowly, buying time. "Because we don't need one." She finally looked up, eyebrows raised. "But big houses have stairs and chandeliers and bathtubs big enough for bubbles." He walked over and leaned on the chair behind her, looking down at her drawing. It was a house with two stick figures in front, one taller, one smaller, both smiling. The sky was purple, the grass was orange. Ava's world didn't care what colors were supposed to be. "What's that?" he asked. "Our house," she said, "but I made it colorful because you always say we're not poor, we're just temporary." Malcolm swallowed. He had said that once, half joking, half praying. He hadn't realized she'd stored it like treasure. He bent down and kissed the top of her head. "That's right, temporary." Ava pointed her crayon at him like a lawyer. "So when is temporary over?" Malcolm opened his mouth. No answer came out, because the truth lived in a place he didn't like to visit. The place where bills piled up like threats, where the future was a fog he had to keep walking into anyway. Instead, he said, "How about we go get cocoa?" Ava's eyes lit up like he'd offered her a trip to the moon. "With marshmallows?" "With marshmallows," he promised. They bundled up in coats and stepped into the drizzle. Malcolm held Ava's small hand, feeling the warmth of her skin through her glove. Being a single father was like carrying a fragile thing in your chest every day. One wrong move, one bad day, one mistake, everything could crack. He didn't talk about Ava's mother much, not because he hated her, not even because he loved her. He didn't talk because some stories were too heavy for a child's ears. The short version: Ava's mother, Tasha, had been wildfire, beautiful, bright, unpredictable. They'd been young, they'd loved hard, and then life had gotten complicated, in the way it always does when you're broke and proud. Tasha had left when Ava was 9 months old, not with cruelty, with absence. Malcolm had spent a long time trying not to take that personally, but pride had a way of turning pain into a shield. And Malcolm Reed was covered in shields. They crossed the street, the Harbor and Pine Cafe, a small place wedged between a bookstore and a laundromat. The cafe always smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans. It was the kind of place where people wrote novels they never finished, where artists pretended they weren't broke, where you could sit for hours and no one asked you to leave as long as you looked like you belonged. Malcolm liked it because it was warm. Ava liked it because the barista, Mateo, always drew little smiling faces in her foam. They pushed through the door, bell chiming softly. The cafe was half full. A few students hunched over laptops, a couple in the corner whispering like they were sharing secrets, the window seats taken by a woman in a gray hoodie. Malcolm barely noticed her at first. She sat alone, staring into an untouched cup of coffee like it might answer a question she couldn't say out loud. Her hood was up, shadowing her face. Her hands were pale against the dark mug. Ava tugged Malcolm's sleeve. "Daddy, look, that lady looks sad." Malcolm glanced again. The woman's posture wasn't dramatic sadness. It was contained, like someone trying very hard not to take up space. He told Ava gently, "We don't know her story, baby." Ava didn't accept that as an ending. "But we can still be nice." Mateo waved from behind the counter. "Malcolm, the usual." "Yes, man," Malcolm replied. "2 cocos, one with extra marshmallows." Ava hopped in place. "And sprinkles." Mateo laughed. "Sprinkles for Ava, always." Malcolm pulled out his wallet, counting bills like they were delicate. Cash today, cards were for emergencies. As he waited, he heard a soft sound, like a breath caught halfway. The woman in the hoodie had looked up. Her eyes were watching Ava with something like longing. Not envy, something older and quieter. Like she'd forgotten what it felt like to be a child who believed in sprinkles. Ava noticed. Of course she did. She smiled at the woman, wide and fearless. The woman blinked, startled, then offered a small smile back, an awkward one, like it had been unused. Malcolm took their drinks and led Ava to a table near the window. He sat with his back to the wall, habit from years of being careful. Ava sat facing the cafe, as if the world was a movie she didn't want to miss. Ava sipped her cocoa, eyes half closed. This tastes like Saturday. Malcolm chuckled. It's Tuesday. Still tastes like Saturday, she insisted. He watched her, feeling something loosen in his chest. Then, unexpectedly, the woman in the hoodie stood up. She hesitated, like the distance between tables was a mile. Then she approached, slow, cautious. Up close, she looked younger than he thought. Late 20s, early 30s maybe. Her face was pretty in a quiet way. High cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had learned to hide its feelings. She stopped near their table, clearing her throat. Ava looked up first, smile ready. Hi. The woman's eyes softened. Hi, she echoed. She glanced at Malcolm. Sorry to bother you. She paused, searching for words. Your daughter, she made it look like it tastes good. Ava held her mug out proudly. It tastes like Saturday. The woman blinked, then laughed, a real laugh, brief and surprised. Saturday, she repeated. Malcolm studied her. He wasn't suspicious by nature, but he was protective. A woman alone, a child, a conversation. That was enough to make his instincts sit up. He kept his tone polite but guarded. You want to try cocoa? Mateo makes it good. The woman nodded slowly, as if making a decision. I actually don't know how to order cocoa. I mean, I know how to say the word, she looked embarrassed, but I don't know how people customize it. Ava gasped like she'd heard a tragedy. You have to get marshmallows. The woman's lips twitched. Marshmallows, she repeated, like she was tasting the idea. Malcolm gestured toward the counter. Go ask Mateo. He'll set you up. She hesitated again, then nodded. Okay, thank you. She started to leave, then turned back. My name is Nora, she said quickly, as if she'd almost forgotten. Nora Lane. Malcolm didn't offer his full name. He never did with strangers. Malcolm, he said, and this is Ava. Ava waved both hands. Hi, Nora. Nora's eyes lingered on Ava for a second too long. Then she turned and walked back to the counter. Malcolm watched her go. Something about her didn't match her clothes, not in an obvious way, not like jewelry or a designer bag. It was subtler. The way she held herself even when she tried not to. The way her vocabulary slipped into polished edges and then pulled back, like she was translating herself into a language she wasn't fluent in. The way her sadness felt. Practiced. Malcolm sipped his cocoa. Warmth slid down his throat. He told himself it was none of his business, but the rain kept tapping the window, steady as a heartbeat. And somewhere inside that gray city, a story had just begun. There are some people you meet like a car passing on the highway, fast, forgettable, gone before you can register the color. And then there are people who appear again, and again, and again. At first, Malcolm told himself it was coincidence. Harbor and Pine was close to his place, close to Ava's school, close enough to feel like a routine. So if he saw Nora there a few times, it meant nothing. Except, she was always alone, always with a cup she barely touched, always watching the room like she was trying to learn how to be human from the way strangers laughed. The second time Malcolm saw her, she was at the same window seat, hoodie up, staring at her phone with an expression that looked like someone had put a knife between her ribs and called it a calendar. Ava spotted her immediately. Nora! Nora looked up, startled, then her face softened. Hi, she said, quieter this time, like she wasn't sure she had permission to be noticed. Ava ran over before Malcolm could stop her, dragging Nora into conversation like it was a game. Nora listened to Ava explain, in great detail, how marshmallows were tiny clouds and how cocoa was a hug you can drink. Malcolm approached, apologetic. Sorry, she's social. Nora shook her head quickly. No, it's fine. She looked at Ava again. It's nice. Nice. Malcolm knew that word. People said it when they meant harmless, but Nora said it like she meant needed. That day, Nora ordered cocoa without looking embarrassed. With marshmallows, she said. Then she hesitated. And sprinkles? Ava grinned like she'd won. Yes. Nora sat with them for 10 minutes, then 20. Malcolm didn't invite her. He didn't stop her. She didn't talk much about herself. She asked questions instead. "What's it like being a dad?" she asked, stirring her cocoa too long. Malcolm shrugged, trying to keep it casual. "Hard." Nora's eyes lifted. "But you make it look steady." He laughed. "That's because you're seeing a highlight reel." Ava frowned. "What's a highlight reel?" Nora smiled faintly. "It's when people only show the best parts." Ava considered that. Then Daddy's highlight reel would be pancakes and bedtime stories. Malcolm grunted. "And cleaning peanut butter off the couch." Ava giggled. Nora watched them like she was looking through a window into a life she'd never been allowed to live. When Malcolm asked, "What about you? Got kids?" Nora's smile flickered. "No." The way she said it made Malcolm feel like he'd stepped on something fragile. He backed off. "Sorry." "It's okay," she said quickly. I don't have that kind of life." Malcolm nodded, letting it rest. Over the next few weeks, the pattern grew. Nora appeared at Harbor and Pine on afternoons Malcolm brought Ava. She also appeared at the used bookstore next door on Saturdays, where Ava insisted on browsing the children's section like it was a treasure hunt. One Saturday, Malcolm found Nora standing in the aisle between business books and self-help, staring at a shelf like it was a foreign language. Ava squealed, "Nora!" Nora turned, surprised, then smiled. "Hi, Ava." Ava held up a book with a unicorn on the cover. "This one is about a unicorn detective." Nora blinked. "A unicorn detective?" Ava nodded solemnly. "She solves crimes." Nora looked at Malcolm as if asking if this was real. Malcolm shrugged. "Seattle's weird." Nora laughed, that brief, startled laugh again. "Yeah," she said, "it is." They ended up at a table near the children's corner, where Ava sprawled on a beanbag and read aloud, making dramatic voices. Nora listened like it was music. When Ava ran off to find the bathroom, Malcolm and Nora were left in a quieter air. Nora traced the edge of the table with her finger. "She's fearless." Malcolm's gaze softened. "She's just 7. Fear hasn't taught her its rules yet." Nora's eyes flicked up. "And you?" He leaned back. "Fear and I know each other well." Nora swallowed. "What are you afraid of?" Malcolm wasn't sure why he answered. Maybe because she asked with sincerity, not curiosity. Maybe because she didn't look like she'd use his truth as entertainment. He said, "Failing her." Nora nodded slowly, as if that made sense. "That's a heavy one." Malcolm studied her. "What about you? What are you afraid of, Nora Lane?" For a moment, her face went still. Then she said very softly that nobody would want me if I stopped being useful. Malcolm didn't respond right away. The honesty of it sat between them like an open door. He finally said, "That's a lonely fear." Nora's smile was small. Yes, Ava came back face bright and the moment dissolved, but Malcolm carried it. After that, Nora started showing up in places that weren't coincidence. Once, Malcolm saw her outside Ava's school at pickup, standing at the edge of the crowd like she'd wandered into the wrong movie. Her hoodie was up. Her hands were in her pockets. She looked like she wanted to be invisible. Malcolm approached carefully. "Nora?" She startled, then looked relieved. "Hi, I was just walking." "Near a school?" Malcolm asked, half teasing, half alert. Nora blushed. "I know how it looks. I wanted to see if Ava's drawing got put up." Malcolm paused. "You remember that?" Nora nodded quickly. "It was good." Ava ran out then, backpack bouncing, and squealed when she saw Nora. "Nora, look, my picture is inside." She grabbed Nora's hand without asking and dragged her toward the hallway window where children's art hung in uneven rows. A rainbow of paper and markers. Ava pointed proudly at her drawing, a stick figure dad holding an umbrella over a smaller stick figure girl. Above them, raindrops, but also sunbeams, like the weather couldn't decide. Nora stared at it longer than necessary. Then she asked Ava, "Can you teach me how to draw like that?" Ava giggled. "It's easy. You just make people happy." Nora's throat moved as she swallowed. "Just make people happy," she repeated like it was a lesson she'd missed. That evening, Malcolm walked home with Ava, Nora trailing beside them. The three of them under one umbrella. Malcolm felt something strange, like a scene that belonged to someone else's life had accidentally slipped into his. He didn't trust it, but it felt good. At home, Ava insisted Nora come upstairs, just for 5 minutes, to see her crayons. Malcolm hesitated. He didn't bring strangers into their space. But Nora didn't feel like a stranger anymore. In the apartment, Nora stood near the doorway at first, hands clasped, as if afraid she might break something. Ava dumped crayons onto the table. "Okay, Nora, draw your house." Nora froze. "My house?" "Yeah," Ava said. "Draw where you live." Nora's eyes flicked toward Malcolm, something nervous there. Malcolm watched her carefully. "You don't have to," he said. Nora forced a smile. "No, it's fine." She picked up a crayon slowly, blue, and began to draw. Her lines were neat, controlled. A rectangle, straight windows, a front door with a perfect knob. It looked less like a home and more like a building. Ava frowned. "Your house looks serious." Nora laughed awkwardly. "It's accurate." Malcolm glanced at the drawing, something tugging at him. It wasn't just serious. It was too clean, too symmetrical, too expensive, even as a sketch. Ava drew next to it, scribbling a crooked house with smoke curling from a chimney. "My house has a kitchen that smells like cocoa," she announced. Nora's gaze softened, and she added a tiny little heart on the door of her house without thinking. Then she looked surprised she'd done it. Malcolm saw it, and for the first time, he wondered, who was Nora Lane really? The truth is, Claire Harrington had been raised in a world where affection came with conditions. Her father had been a man who collected companies the way other men collected watches. He'd believed love was proven in achievements. Claire had learned early, if you were impressive, you were safe. If you were weak, you were replaceable. By 31, she was the CEO of Harrington Commerce, a retail tech empire that moved product like blood through veins, everywhere, constant, invisible, until something failed. She sat in conference rooms with people who smiled without warmth. She went on dates where the men asked questions like interviews. "What's your 5-year plan? Do you travel often? Who's on your board?" She didn't remember the last time someone asked her what kind of cocoa she liked. So she'd done something reckless. She'd pulled a gray hoodie over her head, left her luxury condo, and walked into a cafe that smelled like cinnamon and possibility. She told herself it was just curiosity, a harmless experiment, a way to find something real. And then she met Malcolm Reed and his daughter. And harmless stopped being the right word. Because in Malcolm's presence, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not admiration, not fear, not pressure. Just permission to be human. She told herself she could keep it separate. Nora Lane in the afternoons, Claire Harrington in the mornings and nights. No overlap, no consequences. But the problem with consequences is they don't ask for your permission. The fundraiser at Ava's school was supposed to be simple. A small community night. Parents donate baked goods. Teachers wear sweaters with pumpkins on them. Kids show off art projects taped to the walls. Nobody expects anyone's life to change. Malcolm almost didn't go. He'd worked the night before, and his body felt like it had been wrung out. But Ava's drawing had been selected for the student spotlight, and she'd been excited for days. So he went. He wore his cleanest button-down and his least worn jacket. He combed his hair. He made sure Ava's curls were neat. He wanted her to look like she belonged anywhere. The school gym was bright and loud, balloons bobbing, parents laughing too hard. Malcolm kept his hand on Ava's shoulder as they moved through the crowd. He noticed the difference immediately. The other parents had coats that didn't show rain stains, watches that caught light, smiles that looked rehearsed. Malcolm had been in rooms like this before, not often, but enough. He knew what it felt like to be judged by things you couldn't control. Ava tugged him toward the art display. "Daddy, there!" Her drawing was taped at eye level, under a little gold star. Malcolm's chest tightened with pride. Ava bounced. "That's you." Malcolm smiled. "That's us." Then the microphone squealed. A teacher stepped onto the small stage. "Okay, everyone. Before we announce the student spotlight, we have a special guest tonight." The crowd shifted. Malcolm's stomach tightened without knowing why. The teacher continued. "Harrington Commerce has generously donated to our arts program, and we're honored to have their CEO with us, Ms. Claire Harrington." Applause erupted. Malcolm froze. The name hit like a cold slap. People around him turned their heads toward the stage, faces bright with admiration. And then she walked out. Not Nora, not a gray hoodie and timid smile. Claire Harrington, a woman carved out of elegance and power. Her hair was pinned back, her coat fitted perfectly, her heels clicking with confidence. She smiled at the crowd like she belonged on a stage because she did. Malcolm felt Ava's small hand squeeze his. "Daddy," Ava whispered, "that looks like Nora." Malcolm didn't answer, because Claire's eyes had found him across the gym. The smile on her face faltered, just for a moment, just enough, and Malcolm understood. He understood that the woman who'd sat in a cafe and asked him about Coco had been real, but she had also been lying. People around him murmured, "Wow, she's here. I heard she's single. My husband says her company is going to buy half the city." A mother near Malcolm glanced at him, then back at Claire, and her eyes narrowed slightly as if she was trying to place him, like he was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Malcolm felt heat crawl up his neck, not because Claire was rich, not because she was powerful, but because she had walked into his life wearing poverty like a costume. And he, Malcolm Reed, a black single father who had fought for every inch of dignity, had let her. He remembered every moment he'd relaxed, every laugh, every time he'd let Ava run to Nora without fear. He remembered the way he'd spoken to her like she was just a person. And now, in this gym full of polished parents, he felt exposed. Like he'd been naive in public. Claire spoke into the microphone, her voice calm, practiced. "Thank you for having me. Supporting arts education is important to me." Malcolm couldn't hear the rest. His ears roared. Ava looked up at him, confused. "Daddy, is Nora?" Malcolm bent slightly. His voice came out tight. "We're leaving." Ava blinked. "But my picture." "We're leaving," he repeated, firmer. Ava's face fell. "Did I do something wrong?" That question, small, innocent, nearly broke him. He swallowed hard. "No, baby, you didn't." He took her hand and started toward the exit. Behind him, Claire's voice stumbled. "And I—" The words cut off. Malcolm didn't turn around. He could feel Claire stepping down from the stage, could feel her moving through the crowd like a force. "Malcolm," she called, voice lower, urgent. He kept walking. "Malcolm, please!" The crowd noticed now, heads turning, whispering. Malcolm heard someone say, "Who is that?" Another voice. "Is that her boyfriend?" The word boyfriend landed wrong, too casual, too inaccurate, too humiliating. Malcolm pushed through the doors into the cold night. Rain hit his face immediately, sharp and cleansing. Ava struggled to keep up. "Daddy, wait! Why are we leaving? Nora didn't do anything." Malcolm stopped under the awning outside the gym. Ava nearly bumped into him. He crouched down, forcing his voice to soften. "Ava, sometimes adults aren't who they say they are." Ava's eyes widened. "Like spies?" Malcolm almost laughed. The idea would have been funny if it didn't hurt. "Something like that," he said. Ava's mouth trembled. "But Nora was nice to me." Malcolm's chest tightened. He reached out, wiping rain from her cheek. "I know. And you can still remember her as nice." Ava sniffed. "Are we still getting cocoa?" The question cut through everything. The ordinary desire of a child in the middle of an adult crisis. Malcolm's throat burned. "Not tonight." Ava's face crumpled. Malcolm scooped her into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder. He walked away from the school into the wet night, holding his daughter like she was the only thing that kept him upright. Behind him, the gym doors opened. Claire's voice called again, closer now. "Malcolm!" He didn't stop, because if he stopped, he might say something he couldn't take back. And if he spoke while his pride was bleeding, he might make it bleed worse. The next day, Seattle looked the same. Gray sky, wet sidewalks, people hurrying like they were late to their own lives. But Malcolm felt like he'd been dropped into a different version of the city, one where every billboard and every news headline could suddenly carry her name. He tried to pretend it didn't matter. He got Ava ready for school. He made her oatmeal. He tied her shoes. He smiled when she showed him a drawing she'd made of a cat wearing a crown. But inside, a storm churned. He kept seeing Claire on that stage, polished and celebrated. He kept hearing whispers in the gym. Who is that? He kept feeling the old wound inside him, the one he'd tried to bury, open up again. The wound wasn't about money. It was about being underestimated, being seen as temporary, as an option, as someone you could try on like a coat. Malcolm had spent his whole life proving he wasn't disposable. He'd grown up in Tacoma, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to braid his hair before school. His father had been around in the way distant thunder was around, heard sometimes, never felt close. When Malcolm was 16, he'd been stopped by police walking home from basketball practice because he fit a description. When he was 22, he'd watched a friend with the same degree get promoted over him because the friend seemed more professional. When he'd become a father at 26, he'd been told by people who didn't know him that he was brave for sticking around, as if caring for your child was an unusual hobby for a black man. Malcolm had learned to hold his dignity like a weapon. And now, Claire Harrington had wandered into his life pretending to be poor, pretending to be powerless, pretending to be ordinary. And he had let himself believe that someone like her could see someone like him without turning it into a story. He couldn't breathe around that. That afternoon, while Ava was at school, Malcolm sat at his kitchen table and did something he rarely did. He Googled. He typed, "Claire Harrington, CEO." The screen filled instantly. Photos, articles, interviews, Claire in boardrooms, Claire at conferences, Claire smiling beside politicians, Claire standing in front of a massive warehouse with a hard hat on, looking like she'd conquered the supply chain with sheer will. Malcolm stared. Her face in those photos was familiar and not. It was her, but it wasn't the woman who'd laughed at Unicorn Detective. He scrolled until his fingers hurt. The more he saw, the more he felt stupid. He remembered her thrift store hoodie. He remembered her cheap shoes. He remembered the way she'd asked how to customize Coco. All of it suddenly felt like theater. His phone buzzed. A message. "Nora, can we talk? Please." Malcolm stared at the screen until it blurred. Then he typed back. "Don't." He erased it. He typed, "I saw you last night." He erased it. Finally, he typed what his pride could tolerate. "I'm busy." A second later, another message came. "Nora, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to find out like that. Please let me explain." "Malcolm, please." Malcolm's jaw clenched. He didn't respond. He went to work that night with his chest tight and his thoughts louder than the warehouse. The distribution center was all fluorescent light and metal echoes. Vans lined up like soldiers. Workers moved with tired efficiency. Malcolm walked the floor, clipboard in hand, doing what he always did, keeping things moving, keeping things from falling apart. His coworker, Jamal, leaned against a pallet and said, "You look like you fought a ghost." Malcolm grunted, "Just tired." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "That's not regular tired. That's my soul got jump-scared tired. Malcolm almost smiled. Jamal had a way of naming feelings like they were weather reports. "Drop it," Malcolm said. Jamal didn't. "You and Ava okay?" Malcolm's gaze flicked away. "We're fine." Jamal nodded slowly, accepting the half-truth. Then he said, "You know, if a woman got you looking like this, she better be either worth it or gone." Malcolm's throat tightened. Worth it or gone? That was the problem. He didn't know which Claire Harrington was, and he couldn't risk Ava getting attached to the wrong version. At 2 a.m., while the warehouse hummed, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. "Nora, I'm outside." Malcolm froze. Outside where? His stomach dropped. He checked the time, checked the message again. He called Ava's babysitter, Mrs. Delaney, an older woman in their building who watched Ava when Malcolm worked nights. "Everything okay?" Mrs. Delaney asked, voice sleepy. "Yes," Malcolm said quickly. "Ava's asleep?" "Like an angel," she murmured. Malcolm exhaled, relief cutting through his panic. He typed back to Nora, "Outside where?" The reply came instantly. "Nora, your building. I'm sorry. I know it's late. I couldn't wait." Malcolm's anger flared, not because she was outside, because she thought she could show up whenever she wanted, like her schedule mattered more than his life. He typed, "Go home. Do not come up. Do not knock." A pause, then, "Nora, okay, I'm leaving." "But Malcolm, I'm sorry. I really am." Malcolm stared at the screen until the letters felt like needles. When his shift ended, dawn was leaking into the sky like weak light. He drove home, jaw clenched, hands tight on the wheel. Outside his building, the sidewalk was empty. No gray hoodie, no woman waiting, just rain and quiet. He climbed the stairs and unlocked his door as quietly as he could. Ava was asleep in her bed, one arm flung over her stuffed bear. Malcolm stood in the doorway for a long moment. He felt exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. He went back to the kitchen table and sat down. Then he did something he didn't do often either. He wrote a message. Not angry, not cruel, just final. "Nora, Claire, I don't know what to call you, but I need you to understand something. You don't get to come into my life and treat it like a test. I'm not a lesson. Ava isn't a prop. I can't do this. Please don't contact me again." He stared at it for a long time. Then he pressed send. The message delivered. A few seconds passed, then his phone rang. He didn't answer. It rang again. He didn't answer. It rang a third time. He turned it off. He sat in the quiet kitchen while the rain whispered against the window. He thought about how much he'd enjoyed hearing her laugh. He thought about Ava's smile when she saw Nora. He thought about the tiny heart Nora had drawn on the door of her serious house. Then he thought about the gym full of polished people, and the way his pride had felt like it was being held up for inspection. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against his hands. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself he was protecting Ava. He told himself he didn't need anyone. He told himself and believed that walking away would hurt less than staying. On the other side of the city, Claire Harrington stared at her phone like it had betrayed her. The message sat on the screen, short and sharp and deserved. She read it once, twice, 10 times, each time it cut a little deeper. Sienna Park stood in Claire's office doorway, watching her boss unravel with silent concern. Claire's office was on the top floor of a tower that looked down on the city like an empire. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek furniture, a view of the bay. It should have felt powerful. Today, it felt like a cage. Sienna stepped inside. "You look like you haven't slept." Claire's voice came out hoarse. "I didn't." Sienna glanced at the phone in Claire's hand. "He told you to stop." Claire didn't deny it. "Yes?" Sienna exhaled. "Claire, I know you. When you want something, you go after it like it's a merger. But this isn't business." Claire's eyes flashed. "I know." Sienna softened. "Then why are you doing this to yourself?" Claire looked down at the city through the glass. Cars moved like tiny insects. People hurried, unaware that she was breaking apart above them. She whispered, "Because he was real." Sienna crossed her arms. "And you weren't?" Claire flinched, because that was the question, wasn't it? She had been real, but also not. She had worn a costume. She had withheld her name. She had told herself it was for a good reason. But good reasons didn't erase harm. Sienna said quietly, "If you care about him, you need to consider what he's actually asking for." Claire swallowed. "He wants me gone." Sienna nodded. "Then be gone." Claire's hands tightened. "I can't." Sienna's gaze sharpened. "Because you can't handle being rejected?" Claire's breath hitched, anger rising. "That's not—" Sienna cut her off. "Isn't it?" Silence. Claire looked away. Ethan Vale, the company's communications director, walked in without knocking, holding a tablet. He was always like that, entering like the world belonged to him too. "Claire," Ethan said briskly, "we need to talk about the school fundraiser last night. There are photos." Claire's stomach dropped. "Photos?" Ethan nodded, flipping the tablet around. On the screen, an image of Claire stepping off the stage, moving toward the gym doors. Behind her, curious faces. Another photo. Claire in the doorway, rain beyond, her expression strained. And a blurry shot of Malcolm's back as he carried Ava away. Ethan's voice was sharp. "Who is that?" Claire's throat tightened. "Apparent." Ethan stared at her. "Don't lie to me. That's not apparent. That's a story." Sienna's eyes narrowed. "Ethan, not now." Ethan ignored her. "If the press gets wind of the CEO having some emotional confrontation with a—" He paused, his eyes flicking to the photo again. "With a random guy, it becomes a narrative. You know how this works." Claire's face hardened. "Don't call him random." Ethan blinked, surprised. Claire stood up, suddenly furious. "He's a person, and I hurt him." Ethan held up his hands slightly. "I'm not saying he isn't. I'm saying the world won't treat it that way. We need to manage this." Claire's voice turned low. "No." Ethan frowned. "No?" Claire stepped closer, eyes cold. "You don't get to manage people's pain. Not mine, not his." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Claire, you're the CEO. You don't get to make emotional decisions that—" Claire snapped, "Then watch me." Silence cracked between them. Sienna watched Claire with something like respect. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Fine, but if you do something reckless, don't expect me to—" Claire cut him off with a look. "Get out." Ethan froze. Claire repeated, each word precise. "Get out." Ethan left. The door clicked shut. Claire's hands trembled. Sienna's voice softened. "You're going to go to him again." Claire's eyes glistened. "Yes." Sienna sighed. "Claire." Claire turned toward the window again, staring down at the city where Malcolm Reed lived his life without safety nets. She whispered, "He deserves an apology that isn't a text message." Sienna's gaze softened. "He also deserves his boundaries." Claire nodded, tears slipping down her cheek. "I know." Then she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and did something she rarely allowed herself. She made a choice that wasn't strategic. She chose humility. She grabbed her gray hoodie from the drawer in her office, the one she'd kept like a secret, and stuffed it into her bag. Then she left the tower, not as Claire Harrington, the CEO, but as a woman who had to earn forgiveness, one honest step at a time. Malcolm didn't expect to see her again. He'd told her not to contact him. He'd turned off his phone. He'd cut her off like a damaged limb. For 2 days, it almost worked. Then on Thursday evening, as Malcolm walked Ava home from school, the rain began again. Steady, persistent, Seattle's favorite song. Ava skipped over puddles, boots splashing. "Daddy, look, I can jump over the whole ocean." Malcolm smiled faintly. "That's not the ocean, that's a puddle." It's my ocean, Ava corrected, offended. Malcolm laughed. The sound felt strange in his throat, like laughter had been missing too long. They reached their building. Malcolm unlocked the front door, and then he froze. Someone stood in the lobby, near the mailboxes. Gray hoodie, hands clenched, hair damp from rain. Nora, or Claire, or whatever name she was brave enough to wear today. Ava saw her first. Her face lit up automatically. Nora! Malcolm's stomach tightened. He stepped in front of Ava, instinctive. Nora flinched. Her eyes flicked to Ava, then to Malcolm. She spoke quietly, voice shaking. "Hi, Ava." Ava grinned. "Hi, Daddy, it's Nora." Malcolm's voice came out cold. "Ava, go upstairs." Ava blinked. "What? Why?" "Now," Malcolm said, firm. Ava's smile faded. She looked between them, confused. "Did I do something?" "No," Malcolm said quickly, softening just for her. He crouched slightly. "Go upstairs to Mrs. Delaney. Tell her I'll be up in a minute." Ava hesitated, then nodded slowly. She glanced at Nora once more, her eyes searching. Nora's gaze softened, sadness flickering. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Ava." Ava didn't understand, but she felt the weight. She turned and ran up the stairs, footsteps echoing. The lobby fell quiet except for the rain tapping the windows. Malcolm faced Nora fully now, his jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be here." Nora swallowed. "I know, I'm sorry." Malcolm's eyes narrowed. "You ignored what I said." Nora's voice trembled. "I did, and I'm sorry for that too." She took a breath. "But please, I needed to say this to your face." Malcolm's laughter was bitter. "You've got nerve." Nora flinched, but didn't retreat. "Yes," she whispered, "I do, and you have every right to hate me for it." Malcolm stared at her. Up close, she looked smaller than she had on the stage. Not physically, emotionally. Like the hoodie wasn't a disguise now. It was a confession. He said, "What do you want?" Nora's eyes shimmered. "To apologize." Malcolm's voice stayed hard. "Apologies don't change what you did." "No," she agreed softly. "They don't." Malcolm swallowed, anger sharp. "You came into my life pretending. Do you know what that feels like? For someone like me?" Nora's brow furrowed, pain in her eyes. "I think I'm starting to." Malcolm stepped closer, voice low. "I've spent my whole life being looked at like I don't belong. Like I'm one mistake away from being exactly what people assume I am. I don't get the luxury of putting on poor as a costume. I live it." Nora's eyes filled. "I know." Malcolm snapped. "No, you don't." He gestured sharply, frustration spilling. "You walk into a cafe in a hoodie and call it an experiment. I walk into a room and I get evaluated before I open my mouth." Nora's lips trembled. She whispered, "You're right." The simplicity of it disarmed him for half a second. No defense, no justification, just acceptance. Nora took a slow breath. "My name is Claire Harrington." Malcolm's throat tightened. "I know." Claire nodded. "I lied to you. I lied by omission, and I lied by pretending." Her voice broke. "I told myself I was protecting my heart, but I was really protecting my comfort." Malcolm's fists clenched. "Why?" Claire's eyes locked onto his. "Because I was tired of being wanted for what I own." Malcolm's laugh was sharp. "So you decided to want someone for what they don't?" Claire flinched, tears spilling. "No, that's not—" She swallowed. "I didn't come looking for someone poor. I came looking for someone genuine." She shook her head, desperate. "And you were the most genuine person I've met in years." Malcolm's chest tightened. "So I passed your test." Claire's face crumpled. "It wasn't supposed to be a test." Malcolm's voice rose slightly. "But it was." Claire nodded, voice barely audible. "Yes." They stood there, rain tapping, silence thick. Finally, Claire stepped forward, hands trembling. She didn't reach for him. She didn't try to touch. She kept distance like she understood she'd lost the right. She said, "Malcolm, I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry for lying. I'm sorry for humiliating you. I'm sorry for showing up in your life like I had permission." Malcolm stared at her, jaw tight. "And what now? You think you say sorry and I just forget?" Claire shook her head. "No." Her eyes shone. "I don't want you to forget. I want you to know I see what I did." Malcolm's voice softened just a fraction, exhaustion bleeding through anger. "Why did you keep coming back? If you're Claire Harrington, you could have anyone." Claire's laugh was bitter. "Anyone who wants Claire Harrington, not me." Malcolm's stomach twisted. He hated that he understood loneliness. He hated that her loneliness sounded real. Claire's voice went quiet. "When I was Nora, people didn't stare at me like I was a resource. They didn't pitch ideas at me. They didn't flirt with my net worth." She looked down, ashamed. "And then I met you. You didn't care who I was. You cared if I was cold." Malcolm swallowed. He remembered offering her cocoa. He remembered the tiny heart on the drawing. His anger flickered, confused by memory. He hardened again. "You still lied." Claire nodded. "Yes." A pause. Then Claire reached into her bag slowly, careful, and pulled out something folded. Paper. A drawing. Malcolm frowned. "What is that?" Claire held it out like an offering. "Ava gave it to me the day I asked her to teach me to draw. I kept it." Her voice shook. "Because it was the first gift someone gave me that wasn't attached to a contract." Malcolm took the paper reluctantly. It was Ava's drawing. Stick figures, an umbrella, rain and sun together. On the back, in messy kid handwriting, "For Nora, so you don't be sad." Malcolm's throat tightened painfully. Claire whispered, "I don't deserve her kindness." Malcolm stared at the drawing until his eyes burned. Then he said, voice low, "Why are you really here?" Claire's breath hitched. Because you were right. Ava isn't a prop." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "And I don't want to be the kind of person who uses people, even by accident." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "You've built an empire." Claire nodded. "Yes." "And you're telling me you're scared nobody wants you if you're not useful?" Malcolm said, remembering her words in the bookstore. Claire's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You remember that?" Malcolm's voice tightened. "I remember a lot." Claire whispered, "It's true." A silence. Then Malcolm did something he didn't expect. He asked, "Did you ever plan to tell me?" Claire flinched. "Yes, She swallowed. "I kept trying to find the right moment. And then there wasn't one. And then last night happened." Malcolm nodded slowly. "So you waited until the truth could humiliate me in public." Claire's eyes squeezed shut. "I didn't want that." Malcolm's voice sharpened. "But you risked it." Claire nodded, sobbing now. "Yes." Malcolm felt his anger waver, not disappear, but shift. He knew what it meant to make a mistake that hurt someone you cared about. He also knew what it meant to pay for that mistake. He asked, "What do you want from me, Claire?" Claire's shoulders shook. "Nothing." She wiped her face with her sleeve like she didn't care how she looked. "I don't want you to forgive me just so I feel better. I don't want you to take me back so I can prove something." Malcolm stared. "Then why are you here?" Claire lifted her gaze, eyes raw. "Because I needed you to know it was real for me." Her voice broke. "The laughs, the cocoa, Ava's unicorn detective, it was real." Malcolm's chest tightened. He wanted to believe her. He didn't want to. That conflict burned in him. He said, "Even if it was real, it started with a lie." Claire nodded, tears falling. "Yes." Malcolm looked away, jaw clenched, breathing hard. Then the stairwell door opened. A small figure appeared. Ava. She crept down the stairs, eyes wide. "Daddy." Malcolm's heart dropped. Ava, I told you. Ava stepped closer anyway, brave in her smallness. Her gaze flicked to Claire. Nora, are you in trouble? Claire's face softened. She crouched slightly so she wasn't towering. No, sweetheart. Ava frowned. Daddy looks mad. Malcolm's throat tightened. He didn't want Ava seeing this. Ava stepped between them like a tiny judge. She looked up at Malcolm, voice shaky. Did Nora hurt you? Malcolm hesitated. How did you explain pride to a child? How did you explain being humiliated without teaching her shame? He said carefully. She wasn't honest with me. Ava's eyes widened. She turned to Claire. You lied? Claire nodded, tears shining. Yes, Ava, I did. Ava's mouth trembled. Why? Claire swallowed. Because I was scared. Ava stared at her, serious. Then she said, Lying makes people lonely. The sentence landed like wisdom older than 7. Malcolm stared at his daughter, stunned. Ava looked at him again, voice small. Are we lonely now? Malcolm's throat burned. He pulled Ava into his arms. No, he whispered, not you and me. Ava clung to him. Then she looked at Claire over Malcolm's shoulder. But Nora looks lonely. Claire's breath hitched. Malcolm closed his eyes. This was the problem. Ava saw hearts, not status. Ava didn't care about CEO or poor girl costume. Ava cared about people being sad. Malcolm set Ava down gently and looked at Claire. His voice came out exhausted, stripped. You can't just show up here. Claire nodded quickly. I know, I'm sorry. Malcolm's gaze stayed hard, but his tone softened. If you want to be in our lives, it can't be like this. He gestured between them. No secrets, no tests, no disappearing. Claire nodded, tears falling. Yes. Malcolm continued, voice low. And Ava. He glanced at his daughter. Ava comes first, always. Claire's voice broke. Of course. Malcolm stared at her for a long moment. Then he said something that felt like lifting a weight. I don't know if I can trust you yet. Claire nodded. That's fair. Malcolm exhaled. But I can listen. Claire's eyes widened. Malcolm? He cut her off gently, not harsh. Don't make me regret it. Claire nodded fast, like she'd been given water after years of thirst. I won't. Ava looked between them, hopeful. Does that mean Coco? Malcolm let out a quiet laugh. Claire blinked, then laughed too, wet and shaky and real. Malcolm shook his head slightly. Maybe, he told Ava. Maybe. Outside, the rain kept falling. But for the first time in days, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the beginning of something honest. Trust didn't return like a switch flipping. It returned like a city after a storm, slow, messy, uneven. Claire didn't call. She didn't text. Not after that lobby conversation. Instead, she wrote a letter, an actual letter on plain paper, folded carefully. No logo, no assistant, no PR language. She left it with Mrs. Delaney downstairs, asking politely if it could be given to Malcolm when he had time. Malcolm stared at the envelope for a full hour before opening it. Inside, Claire's handwriting was neat but not perfect, like someone who was trying to be human on purpose. Malcolm, you told me not to make you regret listening. I'm going to respect that. I won't show up uninvited again. I won't contact Ava without your permission. I'm sorry for lying. I'm sorry for the harm it caused you, especially because your pride isn't vanity. It's survival. If you ever decide you want to talk, I'll be here. If you don't, I'll carry the lesson anyway. Claire Malcolm read it twice. Then he set it down, hands trembling slightly. He hated that the letter felt mature. He hated that it made him want to soften, because softening had always been risky. But the next Saturday, Ava stood in the kitchen, hands on her hips, and declared, we should invite Nora, Claire, for Coco. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. We should? Ava nodded like a senator. Yes, because grown-ups need practice being honest. Malcolm stared at her. Where do you get these sentences? Ava shrugged. From my brain. Malcolm tried to hide a smile. Your brain is dangerous. Ava grinned. I know. Malcolm considered saying no. Then he remembered Claire's face in the lobby, raw, apologizing, not defending. He remembered the letter, respectful. He remembered Ava's drawing, rain and sun together. So he made a decision that scared him. He texted Claire, "If you want to talk, you can come to Harbor and Pine tomorrow at 3, 1 hour." The reply came quickly. "Thank you, I'll be there." And Malcolm, "Thank you." Harbor and Pine smelled the same as always: cinnamon, coffee, warmth. Claire arrived at 2:55, 5 minutes early, wearing the gray hoodie but with the hood down. Her hair was damp from rain. Her face was bare, no polished makeup. She looked like she was trying to show up as herself, not as a role. Malcolm sat at the same table by the window, Ava beside him, Coco already in front of her. Ava bounced when she saw Claire. "Hi, Claire." Claire's face lit with relief. "Hi, Ava." Malcolm gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Claire sat slowly, hands clasped, posture careful. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Ava announced, "Okay, no lying allowed." Claire blinked, then nodded solemnly. "Agreed." Malcolm exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Ava sipped cocoa. "I'm just making rules." Claire's lips twitched, a small smile. "Rules are good." Malcolm looked at Claire. His voice came out measured. "I got your letter." Claire nodded, eyes steady. "Okay." Malcolm asked, "Why did you choose Nora Lane?" Claire looked down, then up. "Nora was my grandmother's name." A pause. "She was the only person in my family who didn't treat me like a project." Malcolm's chest tightened slightly. "And Lane?" Claire's mouth curved faintly. "Because I wanted to believe there was a lane I could step into where I was normal." Malcolm nodded slowly. Ava leaned forward. "Are you rich?" Claire blinked, startled by the bluntness. Then she nodded. "Yes." Ava considered that. "Like mansion rich?" Claire's cheeks colored. "Yes." Ava nodded again, satisfied. "Okay, but you still can't buy honesty." Claire's eyes widened. "No," she whispered, "I can't." Malcolm watched this exchange, something shifting in him. Ava didn't fear Claire's money. Ava didn't worship it either. She just categorized it and moved on. Like wealth was just another fact. Malcolm wished he could do that. He looked at Claire. "Why did you start this? Really?" Claire took a slow breath. "Because I was lonely." She said it without drama, just truth. "And because I didn't trust anyone around me." Malcolm's eyes narrowed. "So you decided to trust strangers in a cafe?" Claire's mouth tightened. "I know it sounds ridiculous." Malcolm didn't soften. "It doesn't sound ridiculous. It sounds selfish." Claire nodded immediately. It was. Malcolm blinked. Again, no defense. Claire continued, voice quiet. "I thought, if I could meet someone who didn't know who I was, maybe they'd see me, not my last name." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "And what about my last name, my life?" Claire flinched. "I didn't think enough about it." Malcolm's voice rose slightly, frustration breaking. "That's the problem. People with power don't have to think enough. People like me get crushed by other people's experiments." Claire's eyes filled, but she stayed steady. "You're right." Ava looked between them, worried. She reached out and tapped Malcolm's arm. "Daddy, breathe." Malcolm froze, realizing his fists had clenched. He exhaled slowly. Claire whispered, "I'm sorry." Malcolm leaned back. "I'm not ready to forgive you." Claire nodded. "I'm not asking you to." A pause. Then Malcolm said something he didn't expect from himself. "But I miss you." Claire's breath caught. Her eyes widened. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just whispered, "I miss you too." Ava beamed. "See? Coco fixes things." Malcolm let out a quiet laugh. "It doesn't fix everything." Ava shrugged. It helps. Claire looked at Ava, then at Malcolm. Can I keep seeing you? She spoke carefully. Both of you, but only if it's okay. Malcolm stared at her. He heard Jamal's voice in his head. Worth it or gone? He didn't know which yet, so he answered honestly. Slow, he said, and on my terms. Claire nodded quickly. Yes. Malcolm added, and if the press shows up, if your world tries to turn us into a headline. Claire cut in immediately. I'll protect you. Malcolm's gaze sharpened. How? Claire swallowed. By not letting them near you. A beat. And by being willing to take the hit myself. Malcolm studied her. He saw something he hadn't seen on that school stage. Not just regret. Resolve. He nodded once. Okay. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Ava clapped softly. Okay, next rule. You have to learn unicorn detective voices. Claire laughed, surprise and relief mixing. Deal. The weeks that followed weren't a movie montage of instant healing. They were awkward, real, sometimes uncomfortable. Claire came to the cafe on Sundays. Sometimes she brought pastries from a bakery Malcolm couldn't pronounce. Malcolm teased her gently until she laughed and admitted she'd Googled best cheap pastries like it was a business strategy. She visited the used bookstore with Ava, letting Ava pile books into her arms until Claire's arms shook. She didn't complain. She just grinned and said, I think your father is training you to overthrow me. Ava nodded solemnly. Yes. Malcolm watched Claire with cautious eyes. He saw how she listened, how she didn't interrupt, how she asked questions and actually waited for answers. He also saw how the world kept trying to pull her back. Sometimes her phone buzzed with calls she didn't answer. Sometimes she glanced at headlines on someone else's screen, and her face tightened. Once, Malcolm caught her staring out the cafe window with that old contained sadness, like she was carrying a weight no hoodie could hide. One day, Malcolm asked, Do you regret it? Coming into our lives? Claire's eyes flicked up, surprised. No. Malcolm frowned. Even after how badly it went? Claire nodded, especially because of how badly it went. She swallowed. It showed me who I was becoming. Malcolm studied her. And who was that? Claire's voice went quiet. Someone who thought she could control people like variables. Malcolm's chest tightened. She continued. I don't want to be that person anymore. Malcolm didn't respond right away. Then he said, Changing doesn't erase harm. Claire nodded. I know. Malcolm exhaled. But it matters. Claire's eyes softened, hope flickering. Of course, the world didn't leave them alone. One afternoon, Claire was supposed to meet Malcolm and Ava at the park. Ava had soccer practice, and Malcolm had promised to watch. Claire arrived wearing jeans and a simple jacket, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked like she belonged. But when she stepped onto the field, a woman with a designer bag froze mid-sentence. Her eyes narrowed. Then she whispered something to another parent. Phones appeared like weapons. Claire's stomach dropped. Malcolm saw it happen. He felt his chest tighten. Here it was, the thing he'd feared. Ava ran toward Claire, excited. Claire, did you bring snacks? Claire forced a smile. Yes, I did. But Malcolm saw her hands tremble. The whispers spread. A man approached, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Harrington, he said, didn't expect to see you here. Claire's spine straightened automatically, old training. Hello. The man's gaze flicked to Malcolm. And you are? Malcolm felt the familiar pressure, the room's gaze, the silent evaluation. He stepped forward, shoulders squared. I'm Ava's father. The man's smile tightened. Ah, the tone implied. Interesting. Claire noticed, her eyes sharpened. She said, voice calm but edged, And Malcolm is the person I'm here to support, like everyone else. The man blinked, caught off guard. Claire continued, If you're going to take photos, please don't. There are children here. The man hesitated, then backed off slightly. But the damage was done. The next day, an online gossip blog posted a blurry photo. Claire Harrington at a children's soccer field beside a black man and a little girl. The headline wasn't kind. It wasn't even creative. It was invasive. Malcolm saw it when Jamal showed him at work, jaw clenched with anger. "People are trash," Jamal muttered. "You okay?" Malcolm stared at the screen, heat rising. He thought of Ava. He thought of her classmates. He thought of how quickly children absorbed adult cruelty. He went home that morning with his stomach twisted. Claire called him, voice urgent. "Malcolm, I'm so sorry. I'm handling it." Malcolm's voice was tight. "How?" Claire took a breath. "I'm issuing a statement, not about you, not about Ava, about boundaries, about leaving kids alone." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "Statements don't stop people." Claire's voice hardened. "Then I'll do more than a statement." A beat. "I'm pulling our comms team off their usual narratives. I'm telling them we will not respond to gossip with attention. And I'm contacting the site directly, legal pressure if needed." Malcolm swallowed. "And if they don't care?" Claire's voice lowered. "Then I'll take the attention and redirect it. I'll make myself the story so you don't have to be." Malcolm's chest tightened. He realized something then. Claire Harrington was used to controlling storms, but she was choosing, for once, to stand in the rain without an umbrella. For him, for Ava. Malcolm exhaled, the tension in him shifting. "Okay," he said quietly. Claire whispered, "I'm sorry." Malcolm's voice softened. "I know." A week later, Claire did something nobody expected. She showed up at a press event, one of those polished corporate charity moments, and she spoke without her script. The cameras rolled. The microphones waited. Claire Harrington stood under bright lights and said calmly, "There are lines we don't cross. Children are not content. People's private lives are not marketing, and my company will not contribute to a culture that turns human beings into headlines." Reporters blinked, surprised. Claire continued, "We can be better than that." She didn't mention Malcolm. She didn't mention Ava. But Malcolm watched the clip later, late at night, and felt something inside him loosen. Not trust fully, but respect. Because she was taking responsibility publicly, in her world, where pride was currency and vulnerability was weakness. She was risking being seen as sentimental, soft, human. And Malcolm understood what that cost. One Saturday, in early December, the rain turned to a colder drizzle that smelled like winter. Claire came to Malcolm's apartment for the first time since the lobby, invited this time. Mrs. Delaney had insisted on meeting the famous CEO, then promptly scolded Claire for not eating enough and fed her soup like she was a starving college kid. Claire looked bewildered. Malcolm found it quietly satisfying. Ava dragged Claire to the kitchen table with crayons. "We're drawing family portraits," she announced. "But not perfect ones, real ones." Claire sat, nervous. "Okay." Malcolm leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching. Ava drew first. 3 stick figures under an umbrella. Malcolm stared. 3? Ava nodded like it was obvious. "Yes." Claire's throat moved as she swallowed. She looked at Malcolm, uncertain. Malcolm didn't speak. He just watched Ava's crayon move, bold and sure. Ava added sunbeams again, cutting through rain. Claire picked up a crayon slowly and began her own drawing. This time, her lines were less rigid. The house she drew was smaller, crooked in a way that looked intentional. A heart on the door again, but bigger. Malcolm watched her, feeling something shift. He realized Claire wasn't trying to prove she belonged in his life. She was trying to learn how to, and that was different. Ava held up her drawing proudly. "Look, that's us." Claire stared at it, eyes shining. "It's beautiful." Ava nodded. "Because it's honest." Claire's voice broke slightly. "Thank you." Ava grinned. "You're welcome." Malcolm watched them, and a thought rose in him like a reluctant dawn. Maybe love wasn't about never being hurt. Maybe love was about what people did after the hurt. He didn't say that aloud. He wasn't ready for poetry. But when Claire stood to leave that night, she paused by the door, hands clasped. She looked at Malcolm. "Thank you for letting me in," she whispered. Malcolm's voice came out low. "Don't make me regret it." Claire nodded, eyes steady. "I won't." Then she looked at Ava and waved. "Good night, Unicorn Detective." Ava giggled. "Good night, Marshmallow Lady." Claire laughed, soft and real. She left. Malcolm stood in the doorway watching her walk down the hall. Rain streaked the window. Seattle hummed. And for the first time since the gym fundraiser, Malcolm felt like he could breathe in the same room as her name. Epilogue: 1 umbrella, 3 heartbeats. On the first day, the city got its rare snow, a thin, shy dusting that melted as soon as it touched the ground. Malcolm, Ava, and Claire walked to harbor and pined together. Ava insisted on holding the umbrella even though she was too small. The umbrella tilted wildly, making Malcolm and Claire lean closer to fit beneath it. "See?" Ava announced, proud. "Teamwork." Claire smiled, cheeks pink from cold. "You're the boss." Ava nodded solemnly. "Yes." Malcolm glanced at Claire, then away, pretending he wasn't smiling. They reached the cafe, warmth spilling out as Mateo opened the door. "Well, look at this," Mateo said, grinning. "My favorite crew," Ava cheered. "Coco!" Mateo started their order without asking. Malcolm watched Claire take in the cafe like it was sacred. Not because it was fancy, but because it was real. Claire met his gaze. In her eyes, Malcolm didn't see pity. He didn't see superiority. He didn't see a woman collecting experiences. He saw someone trying, clumsily, earnestly, to be worthy of a life she hadn't understood before. Malcolm didn't know what the future looked like. He didn't know if this would become a forever story or just a chapter. But he knew this: he wasn't alone in carrying his world anymore, and sometimes that was enough. Outside, the snow melted into rain again. Seattle returned to itself. But under one umbrella, 3 heartbeats kept walking forward. If this story touched a place in you, the part that has ever walked away to protect your pride, leave a comment. What would you need to hear to come back and try again?